Well, thank you. This is an amazing event, and it's really incredible that you're celebrating something as important as diversity. And it sounds like it's very core to the HP values, which is truly amazing. Let me, before further ado, let me introduce our incredible guests that we have tonight. First, Tracy Keogh, the Chief Human Resources Officer at HP. Stacy Brown-Philpot, HP board member and CEO of TaskRabbit, and then HP board member Aida Alvarez, who was the former administrator of the Small Business Administration and the first Latina to hold a U.S. cabinet position. Please give them a round of applause.
Sit over here.
Oh, you know what? I'm going to sit over here.
I'm not sure.
I'm sorry. I was taking your seat. Excuse me. Well, there is a lot more talk about diversity, I would say, now more than ever. But what I really want to get into is, at the heart of it, why does diversity matter in the workplace, especially in tech? And how does diversity actually drive innovation and meaningful results for big companies and small startups too? Do you want to start, Tracy?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that because it's such a part of everything we do here at HP. So, in terms of, if you look at studies, there's been a lot of research lately and great business cases made around the impact that diversity has on innovation. E&Y did a study that showed diverse teams actually outperform more homogeneous teams, even if those individuals have higher capabilities. And if you look at Fortune 500, if there are more than 3 women on the board, they actually outperform in terms of return on invested capital, return on equity, and have higher sales. So, there's a lot of, I think, good statistics around that that you see. But here at HP, I think we see it all the time in everything we do. I hope you get a chance, Shane talked a little bit about immersive computing, and I hope you get a chance to see that really innovative platform. That was engineered by one of our directors, Molly Joy, and her diverse team, that they not only engineered Sprout, which is what we call our product that is immersive computing, but also the app ecosystem around that. And then in our 3D area, Leena Rao is one of our managers there who runs an R&D team who came up with the breakthrough around color printing for 3D. And she really attributes that to the diversity of the team that they had working on it. They brought different perspectives and different backgrounds culturally and from different educational backgrounds and so on, that they were really to come up with a solution. So we see it all the time in bringing these teams from around the world that are able to really have an impact and drive new products and solutions for our customers.
So we're not as big as HP. We have 65. Not yet. We have 65 employees in the company. But for us, diversity is about decision making. And we're 58% women in our company, 13% African American, 12% LGBTQ. I mean, it's sort of the DNA of how we built the company. Our company was founded by a woman, and I don't actually think we could exist if we hadn't been founded by a woman, because the service that we provide, that's our core demographic. And so we built a culture of innovation, and at the core of it is how we make decisions. And so whenever we make a decision at TaskRabbit, we have a diverse group of people in the room, which means 2 things happen. One is that the decisions take a little bit longer to make because people are going to disagree, and they're going to debate, and they're going to argue, and they're going to bring a very different perspective. But the second thing that happens is that we make a better decision because of it. And our products and our services resonate with everybody. Our vision is around creating everyday work for everyday people. And when you look at the fabric of America, it is a broad section of people. So we cannot have a company where we're not thinking about every single person when we're building the service. So it's part of our DNA.
Well, I think if I reflect on my service on the board of directors of Walmart, I can tell you that at Walmart, we openly talked about the fastest growing market for us were Hispanics in the United States. And both our hiring and our marketing were geared towards making sure that we were responsive to the needs and the interests of of our Hispanic market. Hispanics also are the youngest by far of the U.S.'s citizens and residents. That's really good for baby, for mom, and those products where you start the customer off early and they become your lifelong customer because you took care of them when they needed you the most. And all of that then in turn was reflected in the hiring and the promotion of associates. We called everyone employee from the CEO on down associates. All of that culminated for us in, and I was really pleased to be a part of this, when I first went on the board and I met with the Hispanic Latino resource group. It was just a handful of people. But 2 years ago, I worked with that group, which had grown and grown and grown, and we actually had a 2-day forum in Bentonville where several hundred Hispanic officers and high potentials came from around the country and from Latin America to meet for 2 days with the CEO, with the heads of all the major groups. And it was all about really brainstorming around growing the market, introducing ideas and products that would make Walmart even more successful. All of which matters because the largest minority group in America is going to be the Hispanic population. Here in California, more than half of all the students are Hispanic already. Hispanics are the largest minority group and will, in the very near future, be more than half of California. So we have to incorporate that diversity into our thinking about markets, into our thinking about innovation and creativity. It just doesn't make any sense to leave them out of the equation.
Tracy, we saw this amazing video of how this board was constructed, but it sounds like HP has had diversity in its origins for quite some time, before this board even became constructed and before diversity became the sort of buzzword I think that it is now. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Well, I think it's really, many of you have heard of the HP way. It's really part of our DNA as a company. I think Bill and Dave, the founders of the company, were dedicated to really having people achieve their greatest potential. And so when you look back in the history, we were the company that really started employee resource groups. I was reading an article the other day from 1973 where Bill actually did training for all the managers on equal opportunity and affirmative action in 1973. That's how forward-looking they were around diversity. And so you can see that woven through our history. And I think it's just a tradition which, as we split into the two separate companies, we thought, following in that tradition, I actually set a goal of creating the 2 most diverse boards in technology, because we had the opportunity to hire 14 new board members to staff those 2 boards. And we looked for, you heard in the video, we wanted, diversity of all kinds, backgrounds, gender, age, and so we were able to put 5 women on each board. We have 2 African Americans on each board. We have people from a variety of different backgrounds. So it's really come together. Dion was talking about our partner conference, our global partner conference, and so we were there and we had a number of board members on the panel, and one of our partners actually raised their hand and said, "My God, this board is so cool, you're making HP cool." And so it was wonderful to see the impact that diverse board was already having on our business. And so I think it translates down. It gives people a great role models in the organization. And then, we're dedicated to diversity at all levels throughout the company. 30% of our leaders are women. And, we have a number of about more than 70 employee resource groups in the new organization. So we're continuing with the tradition that Bill and Dave started that really is the HP way.
Stacy, you have worked also at another forward-thinking company around diversity, that's Google. What are some of the learnings that you've taken from your former employer that you now implement in your role as CEO of TaskRabbit, and of course now as your role as a board member?
Yeah, I'll share one quick story because I like to tell personal stories. Is that ultimately, people just need a reason to relate. So when I was at Google, I ran our office in India, in Hyderabad. And the week that I arrived to go run the office was the week that Ursula Burns was named CEO of Xerox. And so someone came up to me at the sort of end of my initial talk and said, "Oh, so you're like Ursula, right?" And that was the relate. Like, they were looking for a reason and a way to relate. And so here I am, had been at Google for many years leading up to this assignment. Everyone had seen my internal resume, but they were actually trying to establish a personal connection. And that was the way by which they were doing that. So fast forward to my time on this board, joining the HP board, and a month after I joined the board, someone came up to me and said, "Oh my God, my daughter saw that you were on this board, so when she went to college, she wanted an HP printer." And I am sure that the sales organization at HP did a fantastic job of figuring out what the right placement was for the printers in the store, and they got the color scheme right and the design right. But in the end, she was looking for a reason to relate. And so ultimately, my experience with diversity has been humans are trying to make connections with other humans, and they're always looking for a reason to relate. And that relationship translates into what Tracy talked about, which is better decision making, but it's also buying decisions and purchase decisions and connections.
That's right. Well,
Go ahead.
to sort of follow up on what you just said, the Hispanic market even now is more than $1 trillion market. It's headed to $2 trillion. So there's a big market there. But this idea of relating is very important. So when I went, during my trajectory in my career, I spent a few years in public finance at Bear Stearns, and which no longer exists, sadly. But when they brought me on board, they said, we know that there are many Hispanic elected and appointed officials around the country that would be really good for our business, but we don't know who they are, and we have no relationship with them. And so they asked, my charge was, go get them. Interestingly, the way that happened was that I ended up partnering with then Mayor of San Antonio, Henry Cisneros, to develop a national Hispanic agenda, which was an issues agenda, bipartisan issues agenda for the presidential candidates as we were moving into an election. So ostensibly, this was not a business proposition. You might say it was an engagement political proposition. But the result was that I traveled around the country and connected to Hispanic elected and appointed officials all around the country, developed a network, which translated into relationships for the company. And I then went to work at First Boston, and those carried forward. It also meant that a good number of those folks that I connected to ended up in the Clinton administration, because President Clinton vowed that he was going to have a diverse administration. I was fortunate to be in his cabinet. And frankly, by having that kind of a diverse administration, subsequent administrations have had to follow suit. It suddenly became, you could not have an administration where you couldn't see what America looked like. When something like that happens, if you think of the president as sort of the CEO of the USA, other CEOs around the country in corporate America look at this and are reminded that their companies should look like the administration, like the country. And again, that's great for business. Relationships matter. And we can bring our diverse backgrounds to the board, which we do, and to create some heightened sensitivity at times when, not out of any intent, but people ignore that there are others of us out there. So,
I mean, that's a great example of how relatability can really affect a business and then increase business. And same for you, Stacy, your example as well. But HP is a great example of a company that's been doing this for some time. But why are a lot of other companies still so far behind? And Ida, you've had a viewpoint into this. Of course, being in business for as long as you've been, and of course as a former board member of Walmart. Why has it taken so long for there to be that relatability at the board level, not just amongst gender, but amongst ethnicity and beyond?
I actually don't think it was intentional. I think you have all these folks who, by virtue of history, the way our country has evolved, were the kinds of individuals who could go to a Stanford or go to Harvard or go to an MIT, and they were more likely to work together, and they were more likely to be like one another. And that they were in the heat of developing great and exciting innovations. So I don't think they were trying to exclude anyone. I think they were just focused on what they were doing and the people they knew to do it with. But I think as we have evolved, all of a sudden there's time for reflection, because as you become more mature, then you have to actually lift your head up and look around you and say, wait a minute, who's coming on this journey with me? And I think that's what's happening. There's also been some, I'll call it agitation from the outside, which is good. People from our communities, women, people of color, saying, hey, take a look at yourself. You're not really being inclusive. So I think it's an ongoing proposition, and I suspect I'm really proud to be on the HP board. I think Dion, Meg, Tracy have all been innovators and leaders in making this happen and showing the rest of Silicon Valley that this can happen.
Yeah, and I would say it's not easy to do. We talk about it like, oh, it was easy to create this board. It was really hard. There was a lot of pressure on me. There were times when there was a lot of tension with the board who was helping me and the leadership to get it done. I think the challenge is, and Aida was talking a little bit, you have to cast the net wider, right? It's the path of least resistance. It's amazing how quickly your slate of candidates of white male CEOs fills up, and to be able to go find other people, you have to push your search firms you're working with, you have to reach out to other organizations. And so unless you set an explicit goal and you make a huge effort, you really have to show courage to make change. And at the end of the process, Meg said to me, wow, I understand why this is so hard now, after she watched what we went through to do it. And now, of course, the level of cohesion of this board, excitement, the impact it's having on the business, it's great to see the outcome after that work. But you just have to take these opportunities when you find them.
Right. And I think, to Tracy's point, relatability, relationships are so important. And once we start looking, you're going to find all the people. Just a few weeks ago, we were both at a Black Corporate Directors Weekend, and there was just extraordinary talent there. Within the next few weeks, we're going to have a meeting here of Latino corporate directors. So once you start knowing who's out there, and it's both ways, then it gets to be easier. So it'll happen. And also, to your credit, the general counsel is Hispanic at HPI. The head of marketing is Hispanic. I think it's doable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to know what doesn't work. What are some of the practices that just don't actually result in real results around diversity, and not just at the board level, but at the employee level?
Do you want me to jump in on that one? Yeah. So
as the head of HR.
I have to say, I've been working on this problem for 20-something years, and I hate to say, and you know what? I have to say I'm probably more optimistic now than I've ever been. If you'd asked me a few years ago, I wasn't really optimistic about where things were. We were seeing a lot of new companies, especially in the Valley, that seemed not very diverse. And so I think the thing that's changing now, I think it's almost this individual, personal impact that you can have. First of all, I think Google really served the whole Valley well by making their diversity numbers public. And a little competition's a good thing. So everybody started to make their numbers public, and we got to see, really, I think transparency is really important. You've been we've been seeing, you know, the work that Sheryl Sandberg's done. A new study came out today, you know, with McKinsey. You know, one of our, I think, you know, setting that standard with the board here was really important. You know, I've had, I go on meetings with shareholders, and I've had shareholders say, look, when other people complain about we can't find diverse board members, I say, look what HP did. So, you know, each one of these individual actions makes a difference. One of the things our head of marketing did, Antonio Lucio, I think was very powerful. He decided that he did a business case, and he looked at our customers were about 50% women, and he created his team inside with about 50% women leaders. And he looked at all the vendors, the marketing firms, communication firms, advertising firms that were serving us, and they were not reflective of either our customers or our own employee population. And so he wrote a letter, and many of you may have seen it. It was in the Wall Street Journal, I think, again today. And he went to each of the heads of the various firms we work with and said, look, I want to see diversity reflected in the teams that you're staffing to our work that reflect our customers and our employees. And you have about a year to get there and to make those changes. And think about the impact that's having across all of those firms. They're going to have to recruit different people. They're going to have to promote different people. So I feel like the power of the individual to have an impact now is more than I've ever seen it. And I think it's exciting. And we're seeing lots of different initiatives around the world that people are focusing on to increase diversity.
So if I can just add to that, at Walmart, they started out by saying, we want they do lots of business with law firms, and they decided that the law firms had to start having partners, not just junior staff who were women or people of color. And they really went through a process which resulted in some of the law firms that had been there for a long time, legacy law firms, who just could not come up with a woman or anyone of color. They were fired, okay? So the message went out loud and clear that if you want to do business with Walmart, you need to have diversity in your business. And it has repercussions beyond the law firms, okay? So, I mean, I think when you're talking about diversity, you need to think of it, there's the 3 Ps, right? People, procurement, you know, who you hire to do work for you, and philanthropy. If you have a foundation or even marketing dollars, what are you doing to basically support leadership in diverse communities? Those 3 Ps will keep you on the right track.
That's great advice. I just want to give a little warning. I'm going to open it up to questions in just a few minutes, but I also want to give Stacy a moment to, if you have any sort of learnings or things that didn't work in your own experience.
Yeah, I think, so one of the things that doesn't work is not measuring what you're doing. I believe you accomplish what you measure, and if you don't measure it, it's not going to happen. And so I'm optimistic because I think that the attention that Google and other companies that have followed has increased the level of accountability to doing something. And it's very public. And so the conversations of putting things off or on the back burner are no longer happening, and the accountability is there. The other thing that doesn't work is retention. And so once you actually create a diverse environment, it now has to be a place where people feel like they can bring their whole self to work. So it's not just about the pipeline, it's about the culture of what you're building inside the company. And so one of the things that, you know, a specific example of what I did was I had my second kid, and I was COO of the company, and there was a woman who was having a baby 3 months after me, and so I had to take maternity leave. And I couldn't come back early, and I couldn't get online at night because I needed her to believe that she could take 3 months off and come back and still have her job. And if I didn't model that behavior, I couldn't make excuses for it. So in thinking about how do we retain women through their cycles, how do we create a diverse environment, everybody needs to feel like they can bring their whole selves to work. As women, we can go through these life changes and still feel like we can succeed and grow and be ambitious in our careers.
Good.
I would love to open it to any questions that the audience has for this great, great panel. Otherwise, I can keep talking because I have a lot more.
We've answered all the questions.
Everybody,
Anyone?
Chandrakant Patel, I'm Senior Fellow and Chief Engineer. So, you know,
Oh, I
Microphone.
think we have a mic coming.
It'd be easier.
So it was great to hear you talk about how you have used these strategies for the supply chain to drive diversity. When you look at India, the Companies Act necessitates board membership to be diverse. And you're talking about 3 Ps. And thinking of people, profit, planet, the Companies Act also necessitates 2% of the profit be used for corporate social responsibility. Mm-hmm. So what do you think of, is there a need for government regulation to drive diversity, or can we achieve diversity the way we are doing it at HP? Regulation seems a little far, seems to be a little extreme. So particularly since you've served, do you think it'll be necessary in the US?
I don't think, I think the example I gave was lead by example. Right. Okay, the best way to promote diversity is to show that you have diversity on your own team, and to show that that team brings success. When Bill Clinton started, made that commitment, it took him longer. It took us longer to fill those spots, cabinet level particularly, because we wanted the right people in those slots. And of course, he was highly criticized for taking so long and dragging his feet and ignoring other people. He got the team in place, and then during his second administration, the critics came out again and said, well, now you can get rid of this team. And he said, well, this is the team that brought us success, so we're keeping the team. Okay? So I don't think it's so much about regulation. I don't think that's the way the government thinks about it, at least not when I was there. I think it's about leading by example. You can, I ran the U.S. Small Business Administration, which included the 8A program, which were basically contracts that were set aside for certified companies that had minority ownership. And you can, in the contracting process, require for government business that they include diverse subcontractors if necessary, and that your first priority is to look for diverse businesses, just like your first priority is preference is always given to veterans. So there are things that you can do within the government, which, by the way, has an effect of forcing those companies to be creative and be inclusive. So there's a lot that can be done that way. And of course, that does occur as well on a state-by-state basis.
I don't think you can legislate it necessarily, but I think it ends up creating a good dialogue around it and putting focus on things. What you see globally, and many countries put regulations in, like in Brazil, you have to have a certain percentage of employees who have disabilities and different things. It often doesn't solve the problem. And so people end up, like, cost of business is that you pay fines if you don't achieve those numbers. That's really not what you want to have happen. You want you can't legislate everything. You want the discussion and you want the change in the behavior. So I think you have to be careful about it. I think we're going to see legislation around, we've seen this in the election on pay equality, gender pay equality. And so I think that will drive a different discussion that can be helpful. And so, you see things moving in that way, but I don't think you can legislate everything.
Right. I also think that if you just look at the demographics of this country, never mind the fact that there are more women than men. I mean, this is our brain trust. This is not just our market. It just doesn't make any sense not to include, and frankly, you won't have any choice as we go forward. You're going to have to bring in the talent, the same kind of diversity that Dion talked about that he encountered internationally. It's actually here in the United States. We're a country of immigrants. So I think that's just a natural evolution.
Yeah, the whole concept of diversity is great, but it comes down again to culture, because oftentimes women, minorities, whatever, anybody who is not like the status quo is not nurtured in the way that somebody who is just like the guys who are there now is nurtured. How do we overcome that handicap to allow women, minorities, whatever is necessary in both management and in technical positions, to get the kind of nurturing to allow them to assume these positions?
Yeah, so I'll talk about a couple of things. I agree. I think creating an inclusive environment where people feel comfortable and they can, you know, as you talked about, and we say that here, bring your whole self to work, is really critical. And there are a number of ways to do that. I think our employee resource groups are important around that, to make sure that, you know, we're listening and understanding different perspectives. We do unconscious bias training. We've been doing that across the organization, so you can identify what are the things that you don't even realize you're biased about that can create a different environment. One of the other things we did that was very successful, and we'll launch it in the new company, is a sponsorship program. It's not mentorship, it's sponsorship. And, you know, Chandrakant, to your earlier question, the challenge we see is getting underrepresented minorities and women moving up into leadership roles, because that creates an environment where a diverse group of people feel comfortable. And so we had a program we called Ascend, and 78% of the women that were in that program either got promoted or moved into a new job. And so that was probably one of the most successful programs I've ever done in my career. And so, you know, we're looking at how do we do that more broadly. So I think that sponsorship, so you're getting visibility to talent at all different levels, and you're giving them big opportunities, and you're pushing them ahead to be able, as you know, Sheryl Sandberg says so eloquently, lean in. You want people to take those leadership roles. So, you know, I think it's kind of an integrated approach to create, you know, putting things together that make people feel comfortable so that they feel like they can do their best work in that environment.
There's also kind of just tactical things we do. We do unconscious bias training too, but there's tactical things to do as a management team. One of them is when we look at people who get promoted, we look across the gender and we look and make sure that it's balanced. We looked at salaries. I know a lot of companies are doing that now, and it's very public and it's very good. We've always done that. And so those kinds of things are very tactical. And then there's moments as a manager where it's your job to make sure that you root out the problems that are happening and call them out in the moment. And so is your culture not just bringing your whole self to work, because it should be, but are you also identifying these moments where someone might be disadvantaged, and are you calling it out in that moment, and are you building a culture where that kind of behavior is not just accepted, but it's also rewarded?
I've seen this at two companies, Deloitte Touche and Walmart. Deloitte had formed a diversity advisory council, the first, and I was on that first version of the diversity advisory council. They did that as a result of having for 10 years had a women's council because they needed to correct what was happening with women at Deloitte. The head of HR at the time realized that the entry class of CPAs at Deloitte was 50-50 men and women. The women were just as qualified, had the grades, et cetera. And yet, as the years transpired, the women would start leaving. And they had assumed the conventional wisdom was, well, they're all going off to have babies. And he decided that he actually was going to start interviewing the women who had left to find out why they had. And basically, they had gone to other opportunities because they didn't see any partnership path for them. And they weren't going to stick around to be in junior positions all their lives. He then decided to calculate the cost because he said, accountants only want to know about numbers. What was it costing them to train them? And then losing them, you know, after they had invested so much. And when he made the case in terms of dollars and cents, the management said, wow, we really have a problem here. So they developed this women's advisory council and really focused on how to give women a pipeline to become partners, and in fact had huge success. having seen that success, they suddenly realized we have the same issue with diversity, which was people of color, LGBTQ. It was a very inclusive notion, and then they embarked on the same path to see how they could correct that. At Walmart, similar issues, and first of all, they formed a women's it was basically a women's leadership council, which worked directly with the CEO. And all of a sudden, this talent, not just from the US, but from around the world, of women who are already in leadership roles, surfaced, creating more opportunities and role models for the rest of the company. That's being transformed now into a diversity council because they feel they've gotten the traction with the women. But there's a different issue at a place like Walmart, which is, it's 2 million employees, okay? And a lot of decisions are made very much at the local level. And if all your managers are white males, they are comfortable just bringing in and promoting other white males. So they've now developed a program there so that if you want to have upward mobility, you don't have to depend on your manager to give you that. They've developed courses and programs so that if you have the incentive, you take those and you can get promoted in spite of your manager. Also, they dropped the assumption, which many managers had, was, well, women don't want to travel, they don't want to be relocated to other places, which is part of what you have to do for mobility, upward mobility at Walmart. So all these preconceived ideas have been shattered, and the word is out. It takes time. It does take time because you have to change the culture, as the questioner asked. Yeah.
Well, I know that we're at the end of our time together, and I just want to give a round of applause for all these 3 amazing women that are on stage.